Well, that's that Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome. This is Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. But of course, I'm Angela Rippon, and I'm going to be here with you for the next 2 hours, standing in for Alastair. So I'm going to be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really do matter all over the country. And we've certainly got plenty coming up. More rail strikes are causing chaos across the country as we speak. So we're going to be discussing that, plus the Conservative leadership race, of course, and the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. But first, it's the news with Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's just gone midday. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. Lincolnshire police are appealing for help in tracking down a man over the fatal stabbing of 9-year-old Lilia Valutute in Boston. CCTV images have been released of someone they want to urgently question as part of their investigation. They're asking the public to help identify the man, adding if he's seen, he should not be approached and 999 should be called immediately. The force says 2 people who were arrested earlier this week have now been released with no further action. Rail services are being severely disrupted across the country following the latest round of industrial action. Thousands of drivers from 7 train companies have walked off the job as part of a series of strikes over pay and conditions. It's affecting football fans travelling to opening games of English leagues, as well as people trying to get to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. More strikes will be staged next month, which travel editor The Independent Simon Calder says will be even worse.
In 2 weeks' time, a much bigger strike, because that will bring in Avanti West Coast, which runs from London to the West Midlands, northwest England and into Scotland, and also Cross Country, which does lots of stuff, particularly centred on Birmingham. If, for example, you wanted to travel on the Great Western region, and that's a really significant one, as you can imagine this time of year, there are no trains serving Devon and Cornwall.
In a huge blow to Rishi Sunak, former Tory leadership contender Tom Tugendhat has endorsed Liz Truss in the race to become Prime Minister. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee says her promises of tax cuts are based on true Conservative principles and that only she can unite the party. He says both contenders have huge qualities and many talents, but Ms Truss has an advantage on the world stage because of her cabinet position. But Conservative MP Andrew Bowie told GB News Rishi Sunak would be a better leader given the cost of living crisis.
When Chancellor created the furlough scheme that saved 11 million jobs in a matter of days, saved thousands of businesses from going bust with the bounce back scheme and other support measures to support them, introduced e-tax help out that saved so many of our hospitality industries from going bust over the summer of 2020. So I think when you look at it in the round, Rishi has demonstrated by his actions as Chancellor that he's very, very willing and able to deliver short-term measures to support people who are struggling.
The lawyer for victims and families impacted by the infected blood scandal says they must be compensated immediately. It's after the inquiry chairman said more than 2,000 surviving victims should receive £100,000 each without delay. About 2,400 people died in what's been labelled the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS after patients were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 1980s. In a major shake-up of the youth prison system, the government is building the UK's first secure school for young offenders. It will house some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, aged between 12 to 18, including those who've committed murder. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab, who visited the site in Rochester in Kent, says the radical change in approach aims to break the cycle of crime.
That is the difference, and that is the ethos change and the regime change that you'll see in a place like this. And what it means for those hard-to-reach young people who've committed some serious crimes is they get a chance to go through a school curriculum. Many of them will have been truants or expelled, and actually sit down and learn and get those skills. They'll get training. There's going to be small-scale farming done on the site, so they can get some vocational training as well. And we know in the evidence from the US, from Spain, from Scandinavian jurisdictions, is that with this particularly tough to reach young group. It is the key to giving them an opportunity to turn their life around and fundamentally reducing the very high levels of reoffending from young offender institutes. And that will keep our streets safer.
Boris and Carrie Johnson are hosting a wedding party at the Cotswolds estate of a major Tory donor. A huge white marquee has been erected on the grounds of Dalesford House. The event will commemorate the couple's wedding, which was held during COVID restrictions in Westminster Cathedral in May last year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Angela.
Now, we were warned that it was going to be a summer of disruption and chaos for travel, and it seems that that is exactly what is happening. Rail services around Great Britain are already severely disrupted today by the most widespread strike by train drivers since rail privatisation in 1996. Members of the ASLEF union, that's the one that supports Britain's train drivers, have walked out for 24 hours over pay across 7 different train companies, leaving only a minimum number of lines running. Now, this strike by drivers comes 3 days after a national strike by members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union, the RMT. That shut down most services. Now, alongside this unrest, RMT's General Secretary Mick Lynch threatened a general strike in retaliation to Liz Truss's threats to curb industrial action if she becomes Prime Minister. And indeed, the 2 leadership contenders, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, have both said they will ban strikes on essential public services like the railways. Truss has even said that she would legislate for minimum service levels on critical national infrastructure in the first 30 days of government. So is there a way of mitigating these disputes? Should our current Transport Secretary Grant Shapps be doing more? And where does this leave rail passengers? Has anyone even thought about them? Lots to unpick there, so we've invited a whole wealth of guests, including MPs, political commentators, passenger support spokesmen, and many, many more. Well, GB News, of course, is all about you, our viewers, and we would like to hear from you as well on all of those stories and anything else you're thinking about, actually. So tell us what you think. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Well, I'm glad to say I'm joined now by Madeleine Grant, who is a columnist. She's assistant comment editor and parliamentary sketch writer for The Telegraph. Madeleine, on the train strike, both sides seem to be absolutely digging in, don't they? They're getting really very determined about this strike. What do you think it's going to take to break the deadlock?
You know, I don't know, because as you say, there's a real it's like both sides have kind of have dug themselves into these trenches. I mean, on the one hand, as you mentioned, you have this is all happening amid the backdrop of a Conservative leadership race, in which both candidates are now trying to sort of out-right wing the other and to really prove their muscle as proper Conservatives, especially in Rishi Sunak's case, because he's been criticised so far for being far too much of a status quo candidate. So now he's looking for opportunities to show that he's a sort of true blue Tory. And then on the other side, you have even Labour's Keir Starmer is very much using these rail strikes as an opportunity to show just how much he has moved away from the Labour Party of the past and the old trade union influence. And this week he sacked a shadow frontbench Minister Sam Tarry, who had gone behind picket lines. So,
but it wasn't just for being on the picket lines, was it? It was because he was actually talking about government policy, which he hadn't been given permission to do.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. Yes, he'd kind of gone freelancing and was saying, here's what we will do, making up policy on the hoof. But there was also a ban on shadow ministers from doing that. So to let him go ahead and do that would have made him look very weak indeed. So pretty much all of both major parties are now trying to prove their weight in this sense. So I don't really see a massive relaxation of the position coming from there. And the other thing is, of course, that since the lockdown, everyone has changed, not everyone, of course, not all industries operate like this, but many industries have changed their working habits. So more people can work from home. So the unions don't quite have the same leveraging that they would have had, in the 70s, when it wasn't just passengers, it was also they were supplying energy and they had the ability to turn off the lights across the country.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned what's happening in the race. I have to ask you about that. Rishi Sunak was seen as the golden boy of the Tory party, and he is really lagging behind. Liz Truss got over 60% of support from Conservative voters, according to the latest polls. Rishi Sunak with less than around 30. Where's he gone wrong?
Well, I think that his big problem is that he's been far too safe. He thought that he could basically sell himself as, I'm a status quo person, I will be responsible. You need a responsible person to weather you through these tough times. But I think he had massively underestimated the extent to which Conservative Party members were actually looking at the state of affairs after Boris Johnson and saying, we've been in charge for 12 years. We don't really have all that much that's Conservative to show for it. And even if we are taking a bit of a gamble with Liz Truss, I think that many felt that we might get some more Conservative policies enacted, and that would be a risk worth taking. And Liz Truss has been making, I think, all of the right noises in the hustings, whereas for not just the hustings, but throughout the campaign. And I think that Rishi Sunak has been a bit too safe, and he's now being drowned out by her campaign. He's struggling to cut through. I think his problem is that he's not taken enough risks.
Yeah, well, she is taking a pretty big risk, isn't she, by saying what she is saying about the unions at the moment. And you've got there, as we said earlier, Mick Lynch threatening that he's going to call out a general strike if she becomes the Prime Minister. I mean, he's been saying that some of the things that she's been doing, he says it's the biggest attack on unions and people's individuals, and that he's he's taking away people's right to strike. He's very angry and says that he is going to call a general strike, which would be disastrous, wouldn't it, if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister? I mean, how do you balance those two sides of this particular issue?
Well, it's a kind of short-term, long-term thing, because I would imagine in the short term for Liz Truss to be seen as the scourge of the unions would actually be quite beneficial to her. A lot of Tory members would say, well, great, she wants to take them on.
Shades of Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly. But in the long term, that might create massive logistical problems for when she actually becomes Prime Minister. So I think you have to kind of get the balance right between sounding bullish now and perhaps being so bullish that any kind of compromise becomes totally impossible later.
Yes, as a lot of cynics will say, is, of course, whatever politicians say when they want to be elected is not necessarily what they do once they get into position. But I see that there's a quote which says from one of Sunak's supporters that at the moment Liz Truss is getting away with blue murder. He's got to be much more ruthless. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak's campaign has been accused of being pretty ruthless when it counts. I mean, he's had Gavin Williamson helping him out and applying some of the dark arts that he once employed as chief whip. So I think that's, I mean, you would expect them to say that, wouldn't you? I think perhaps there's a sense of frustration that Liz Truss has taken up so much of the oxygen. And now I think Rishi Sunak has had to change course on a number of areas. He has to come out with sort of Tory red meat and saying we support grammar schools and further tax cuts, having said that was fiscally irresponsible. So you can see that they're now pivoting, and I think that it's to make up for that lost time in which Liz Truss's team were sucking up all the attention.
Well, very briefly, you say taking up some of the oxygen. Your newspaper is actually taking up an awful lot of column inches in support, it seems, of Liz Truss as opposed to Rishi Sunak. I mean, has your paper pinned its colours to the mast?
I don't think so. I think we have not. I think the fact is that a lot of people are now coming out for Liz Truss because they sense that she's a likely winner, and they, perhaps people would like to keep their jobs. And it hasn't just been my paper; it's also been the Times. A couple of days ago, Ben Wallace was declaring his support. I think it's natural that when a candidate develops more momentum, that more and more people come out for them. Especially those who would like to either keep their cabinet jobs or to be appointed at some later date.
Well, the race is certainly becoming very interesting and quite acrimonious in some areas. Madeleine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Now, that was Madeleine Grant. She's a columnist, assistant comment editor, and indeed the parliamentary sketch writer for The Telegraph. But joining me now to continue this conversation is Professor Len Shackleton. He's editorial and research fellow at the IEA, and he's also a professor of economics at the University of Buckingham. Welcome to you, Professor Shackleton. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I want to talk to you to start with about the rail strike, if I may, please, because the employers are saying that working practices have certainly got to be changed if they're going to make the railways economical in the future. Would you say that that should be the area that they should be concentrating on rather than actually just talking about pay? Because if they get the working practices right, the rest should follow automatically.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get this right, though, Angela. I mean, many of the issues which they're still arguing about working practices have been live issues for 30 years or more. Mm-hmm. Things like driver-only operation and ticketing and maintenance and rostering people and so on. What tends to happen is that these strikes get bought off with promises and so on, but nothing very much happens. And I think this is something we've really got to concentrate on this time round, because the future of the railways is hanging on a thread at the moment.
There's a very interesting interview in I think it's The Telegraph today. It's an interview with Sir Peter Hardy, who's chairman of the railways, and he says that people are able to shift their lives around. They don't have to become quite so dependent on the railways. It was quite true, I think, in the last strike that we had a couple of weeks ago, that people said, well, OK, if I can't go to work, I'll just work from home. Do you think that the union bosses, that Mick Lynch and his team are still thinking in terms of unions of the 70s rather than of the 21st century, of the 2000s?
Well, I think I've seen Mick Lynch quite often on TV, and I've spoken with him on TV, and they seem to be in denial about the changes which are taking place at the moment. What we've got is a shift, really, from the part of the railway which made profits was commuter travel and business travel, and that is not coming back on the scale which it did previously. The boom area is in leisure travel. And we've got a strike today when normally we'd expect, with football starting again, we expect large numbers of people travelling, Commonwealth Games, people going for nice weekends in Bath, Bristol, York, etc. But they're not able to do so because they're on strike. And I think it's, we've got to. I blame this partly on the government, of course, because the idea of this new railway, which we now for 3 years, and yet very little has happened about it. We have no idea what the future shape of the railways is going to be. We had about 3 lines in the last Queen's speech about this, but very little about what the future of the railways, the future of the railways is. And until we get that, then we're going to get these kinds of strikes.
Do you think there's also a problem that, as I understand it, the leaders of the RMT have not actually put many of the proposals that the employers have come up with to the actual membership? It's actually Mick Lynch and his team who are saying no, rather than it being put to the membership. Do you think they've made a big mistake there? Well,
the whole conduct of these strikes is peculiar, Angela, because there are a lot of different things all tied up with it. As I understand it, for example, the RMT's action is tied with a whole range of issues, some of which are to do with maintenance and some of which are to do with signalling. Mm-hmm. Now, they've actually sorted out the signalling stuff, but they can't go back to work because they haven't sorted out the maintenance stuff. So, it's a kind of all or nothing thing. And this is going to drag on for a long, long time unless we do something fairly dramatic about it. It's interesting to hear the candidates, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, promising some action on this. I'd like to see what this action is going to be.
Well, I think so would we all indeed. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And actually, Professor Shackleton, I would love to put some of these points to someone from one of the unions, but I'm afraid they weren't able to come and join us on the programme today. Maybe they couldn't get a train. Thank you very much indeed. Now, that was Professor Len Shackleton. He's editorial and research fellow at the IEA, and he's Professor of Economics at the University of Buckingham. Now, You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, but for this weekend with me, Angela Rippon. And we've got lots more coming up on today's show. The Commonwealth Games, of course, is underway in Birmingham. We're going to be speaking to a very special guest next about what it means for the city that is hosting the Games. And that's coming up next. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy, with showery outbreaks of rain pushing eastwards across the country. Let's take a look at the details. Across northern Scotland this afternoon, there'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, though most places could stay dry. Highs reaching 21 Celsius, with winds falling light. Northern Islands will remain largely cloudy, with some light and patchy rain in places. In any brightest spells, temperatures will lift to 21 degrees Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for northern England with spells of rain. Some of the rain could be heavy, feeling cooler with highs of 21 degrees Celsius. Turning a little brighter for northern parts of Wales through this afternoon, though there is still the risk of a few passing showers. Breezy over the mountaintops, highs of 20 degrees Celsius. Often cloudy for the East Midlands with a few glimmers of sunshine possible. However, there could be a few showers too, which may occasionally be heavy. Feeling warm with highs of 25 Celsius. East Anglia will be mostly cloudy today, though largely dry. The odd shower is possible, and it will be a warm feeling afternoon with highs reaching around 25 degrees Celsius. It will be a mainly dry afternoon to come across southern parts of England, with spells of warm sunshine and generally light southwesterly winds, highs approaching the mid-20s of Celsius. Further showery rain will push eastwards across central and western parts this evening. Elsewhere should stay mainly dry, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 24 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News with me, Angela Rippon, for this weekend. Now, the 2022 Commonwealth Games are underway in the city of Birmingham after kicking off with a memorable, fantastic opening ceremony on the Thursday evening. Well, Great Britain is already off to a flying start because it has 3 gold medals already and chances to get several more today. Well, Birmingham has been preparing to stage these games since it was announced back as in 2017 as the host. It is the largest event that's ever been held in the region, with 11 days of sport drawing thousands of spectators. But what does it actually mean for Brummies to have the games on their home turf? Well, joining me now is one of Birmingham's most famous exports. It's Michelin-starred chef Glyn Pennell. Glyn, welcome. You must be walking on air at the moment, are you?
Most definitely. I mean, it's been a long time coming, and we've had obviously a nightmare of obviously the pandemic and stuff. But for us as Brummies to pull this together over a short period of time and have all of the difficulties put in place, we're there and we're here. And the opening ceremony was absolutely fantastic, and the atmosphere on the streets is phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, were you at the opening ceremony? Did you see it? I mean, what did you think of it as a way of actually promoting Birmingham? Do you think it did it?
I really do. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was invited, but some of my staff were on holiday, so I had to stay in the kitchen. But a good friend of mine, Stephen Knight, was a massive part of it. He was there. He sort of put it together, and I just thought, what a fantastic job. And for me, it was very, very emotional.
Yeah, I bet it was. Now, I keep hearing this thing that people are saying, well, it's putting Birmingham on the map. Crikey, you've been on the map forever, haven't you? I mean, what more is this going to do for Birmingham, do you think, that hasn't already happened?
I mean, for me, Birmingham is the centre of the universe, and it has been from the day I arrived. And if it wasn't for Birmingham, we wouldn't have light bulbs, we wouldn't have the steam engine. So we've been on the map for a long time. But I think what it is Birmingham's always been regarded as quite an industrial city, a city of industry. And over the years, that's sort of fallen to the side a little bit. And we've become a city that people really want to visit. And my sort of quote's always been, people used to drive through Birmingham. Now people drive to Birmingham. So it's absolutely phenomenal.
Well, all right. I mean, let's assume that there are people watching this programme who have never been to Birmingham. They're not going to drive through it. They're going to stop. I think your tag is Yummy Brummy. So come on, Yummy Brummy. What are the yummy things that people could look forward to in Birmingham if instead of driving through, they do stop?
For me, the first thing that's great about Birmingham is the people. It's such a multicultural place, from sort of like the Kashmiris, Pakistanis, Indians, to the West Indies, to the Jamaicans, to the Eastern Europeans, and to the likes of people like myself as well. So the people is the first thing you'd want to come to Birmingham for. The food is phenomenal. It's very diverse. Like I said, all of those cultures play a massive part on the food scene. We have now more Michelin-star restaurants than any other city outside London. We're the youngest and most vibrant and multicultural city in Europe. I think average age of 25. Well, I am slightly older than that, as you can see. It's just, for me, this has really shone a light on how great Birmingham is, but also how great Birmingham can become. I think it's a great place now, but I think the journey has really started to pick up pace, and the infrastructure of the place is a lot more easier to get around with the trams and stuff. So yeah, so it's a place that you want to come. And the restaurant was full all day yesterday and all day today. And when I go out and see the customers, there's lots of customers that are not from Birmingham, so people are really coming here.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking that Birmingham is one of the cities that's putting in a bid also to have the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine?
I think so. I think at the minute we're on a bit of a roll, so we're throwing our hat into the ring, literally into the bull ring on absolutely everything. And if we get the the song contest, we'll smash that as well. So I'm so confident, especially the way that the games has really taken off. I just think we can do anything. I really do.
Well, can you now do anything special in your restaurant? I mean, are you doing any special menus or recipes or new dishes to celebrate the games?
No, to be honest with you, my cooking's got quite a personality, believe it or not. So we're sort of really, a lot of the dishes I do are connected to Birmingham. They're about me being brought up in this fantastic place. And, I just want to showcase how great the food is here and how unique that my food is and Birmingham is as well, really. So I think we had a table of 10 Canadians, VIP guests yesterday, and they're asking me about the Balti, and they're asking me about the sort of style of cooking I do, and it's just about that, really. It's about showcasing exactly what me and my team do at Purnell's.
Well, you're a great ambassador for your cities. Thanks very much indeed, Glyn, for joining us. Thank you so much. That was Glyn Purnell. Bye. Bye for now. That was Glyn Purnell, Michelin-starred chef and the owner of Purnell's restaurant in Birmingham. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Ripper. We've got plenty more still to come this afternoon. The war in Ukraine continues to rage. We're going to bring you up to date on what's happening on the ground and militarily. But first, let's get the news from Alice Porter.
It's just gone 12:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. Lincolnshire police have released CCTV images of a man they want to question over the fatal stabbing of 9-year-old Lilia Valutute in Boston on Tuesday. They're urgently appealing for help to identify him, adding if he's seen, he should not be approached and 999 should be called immediately. Rail services are being severely disrupted across the country following the latest round of industrial action. Thousands of drivers from 7 train companies have walked off the job as part of a series of strikes over pay and conditions. It's affecting football fans travelling to opening games of English leagues, as well as people trying to get to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. In a huge blow to Rishi Sunak, former Tory leadership contender Tom Tugendhat has endorsed Liz Truss in the race to become Prime Minister. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee says her promises of tax cuts are based on true Conservative principles and that only she can unite the party. The lawyer for victims and families impacted by the infected blood scandal says they must be compensated immediately. It's after the inquiry chairman said more than 2,000 surviving victims should receive £100,000 each without delay. About 2,400 people died in what's been labelled the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS after patients were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 1980s. The government is building the UK's first secure school for young offenders. The site in Kent will house some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, aged between 12 to 18, including those who've committed murder. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says the radical change in approach aims to break the cycle of crime. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and Friends.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 25 minutes to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News with me, Angela Rippon. Now, the turmoil in domestic politics really has pushed the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing war right down the news agenda. So we've decided that come what may, we're going to find time to bring you up to speed. Now, President Zelensky has said that the first grain ship from Ukraine since the Russian invasion in February is ready and waiting to leave the port. It comes as Ukraine steps up its campaign to retake the occupied Kherson region, and it follows a Friday night address from President Zelensky in which he denounced the Donetsk prison attack as a deliberate Russian war crime, as both Moscow and Kyiv blame each other for the 40 reported deaths there. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by former NATO commander and former Ministry of Defence Director General, Rear Admiral Chris Perry. Chris, thank you for joining us. Let's start with that battle for Kherson, which I think is going to be the next, as it were, bloody centre of battle in the Donbass region at the moment. And I'm reading a lot of conflicting reports about what is actually happening there. Now, you've got the Ukrainians apparently telling the Russians, retreat or face annihilation. And yet the Russians are saying that they're going to bring in an elite force, which will include a lot of mercenaries who intend to hold on to that position. Now, what is the state on the ground as you understand it?
Good afternoon. You're absolutely right. I think it is very confused. And what is confusing things even more is disinformation by both sides. Now, Kherson sits right above Crimea and is critical to the way in which the Russians defend Crimea and also what they've seized to the east. So they're going to fight very hard. I think if I were Russian right now, I'd be very worried about Kherson becoming a sort of reverse Stalingrad. And they actually get caught in there. So any troops they push in there, whether they're mercenary or regular troops, are going to get caught by the surrounding Ukrainian troops. On the other hand, the worry for the Ukrainians is that up until now they've been trying to defend country. They haven't really done a great deal of counter-attacking. So counter-attacking will be new for them. They'll have to learn new disciplines. They'll be exposed to Russian artillery, rocket and aviation strikes. And so we're going to have to see whether it settles down before we really determine who's winning and who's losing.
But if the Ukrainians do manage to reclaim that territory, as they're saying, it could be liberation for the whole region. Do you see that as being a really key part to the whole battle for the country at the moment?
There's no doubt about that. It'll be a turning point because, as I said, it'll expose Crimea and also those areas to the east to attack by the Ukrainians. And the Russians are going to fight hard to hang on to Kherson. There's no doubt about that. What really worries me and will appall the rest of us, I think, is what the Russians have been doing in and around Kherson. They've been liquidating people. There have been all sorts of atrocities on the ground. I suspect they've been clearing up and cleaning up the crime scene, as it were. And I think the world needs to be ready for a large number of atrocities that have been committed by Russia in that so-called liberated area.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be talking to a Ukrainian MP immediately after talking to you, Chris, and that's one of the points I want to put to her. But what I would like to ask you as a military man is, at the moment we've got the Ukrainian troops being trained by the British. As we understand it, there's a lot of new armaments that they've got, mainly those that have come from America. What is it going to take, though, do you think, to create the tipping point where we are genuinely going to see which way this battle, not just for this area, but for Ukraine as a whole, is going? Will it be Russian ownership, as it were, or will the Ukrainians take all of that back?
I think it's a very tough call for the Ukrainians to take all the land back that they've lost right now. They're going to need to rebuild. If I were a military man on the ground now, what I would be seeking to do is surround the greatest number of Russian troops and kill and capture as many of them as possible to show Russia what the price is for being in Ukraine. And I suspect that's what will happen in Kherson if the Ukrainians manage to get their tactics and their operational level right. Surround Kherson and as many Russian troops as you can, and then drive south towards Crimea, because that it really is the Achilles heel and also the sensitive spot for Russia. If they lost everything else in Ukraine, they'd still want to hang on to Crimea. So Kherson is definitely the tipping point of this war. If the Ukrainians recapture it, surround large numbers of Russian troops, and then can drive south towards Crimea and Sevastopol, the Russians will need to come to terms if they can't counter that.
Let me ask you then briefly to finish, if I may, what do you make of reports that I've been reading which suggest that Putin at home is not only just having difficulties with his health, but he's also concerned about the economic problems that his country is actually facing, which perhaps they're not adding or admitting to worldwide, but within the country there are major, major problems for him. I've read a report which says that he is contemplating fleeing the country into Syria via Turkey if indeed there is real unrest back at home in Russia. You're laughing. You don't give it much credence, I take it.
Well, I think there's all sorts of fanciful things. No. I mean, look, dictators always hang on to the very last moment. They've got huge power bases. There's a lot of wishful thinking here. And one of the things I've been attacking for some time now is the strategy of wishful thinking that we've adopted in the West. We've got to come to terms with the realities of the 21st century. Power is being wielded in ways in which we haven't seen since the 1930s. We've got to come to grips with that. It's like saying that Hitler would have fled from Berlin in 1945. It ain't going to happen. And the only way he's going to be removed, I think, is if he dies or if the clique around him decides it's not in their interests anymore to have him there. If you've seen the film The Death of Stalin, that's exactly what's going on in Moscow at the moment.
Thanks very much indeed for that assessment, Chris. Appreciate it. Former NATO commander and former Ministry of Defence Director General Rear Admiral Chris Parry there. Well, we've also got a voice on the ground, so I'm delighted to be joined now by Ukraine MP and People's Deputy of Ukraine, Lysa Vasilenko. Lysa, following events, obviously, in the Donbass at the moment, particularly closely, what is the latest you have from that region where Kherson is concerned?
There's heavy fighting going on there, as well as all along the Ukraine-Russian border on the east and southeast. And the general was absolutely right in saying that Ukraine is actually preparing for counterattacks. We were unable to do that beforehand because we didn't have the necessary means, the necessary weapons, and the necessary numbers. But now, as we are furnished with these weapons and as there is a bigger readiness from our European and North American partners to give us those weapons to fight back Russia, we are more ready to start fighting. Moreover, we are also very much aware in Ukraine that possibly Russia is going to open up a second front, that from Belarus, and use Belarus as a launch pad for attacks on the western front of Ukraine. So we are ready for that and to counter those attacks as well and to go in with counterattack tactics.
Whichever way it goes, this is going to be a really bloody battle, isn't it? Is Ukraine ready for that?
It already is a bloody battle, and in all honesty, Ukraine has been in this battle for not for the last 6 months, but for the last 8 years, because this bloody battle started in February 2014, and we have been fighting all of this town in the towns and villages of Donetsk and Luhansk regions with a lot of back and forth and a lot of shootings and casualties. And yes, in February this year, the Russian side escalated the war to absolutely unprecedented levels, and the casualties are immense, both military and civilian. But Ukraine will be fighting, and will be fighting until the very last Russian soldier leaves Ukrainian soil, because this is the only way that we can survive as a country and that we can survive as a nation. We do not have any other option, and we do not have any other choice, because we Ukrainians, we don't have another Ukraine or another country where we can possibly live and exist.
Chris Pennell touched there on the question of atrocities and war crimes. And we've been reading here in the British press about the Ukrainian soldier who was castrated publicly. We're also reading today about the 40 or so prisoners of war who were killed in one of the areas in the south there. And suppose, as we understand it, that they were mostly prisoners of war who were involved in that elite corps that had stayed so long in Mariupol. Now, the Russians are saying that this is the Ukrainians who were bombing that prison, but the Ukrainians are saying that actually it was artillery from the Russians and that they have blown up that particular prison so that they can hide the fact that they are mistreating, that they are torturing your prisoners. Do you have any comment to make on that at all?
Russians are butchers, Russia is a terrorist state. The leader of that state and the leaders of the army of that state are completely out of their mind maniacs who will stop at nothing. Violence is a form of pleasure for them. This is what I can say emotionally. From the perspective of international law, and if I'm speaking as a lawyer here, Ukraine has already put in a claim with the International Torture Committee to make sure that there's due investigation carried out and that there's due process to identifying the guilty parties, the guilty men who are committing these war crimes, and bringing them to justice. Well, in fact, the Russian soldier who has been guilty of the atrocities mentioned, of the castrations and then further torture, and ridiculing of the Ukrainian soldiers. He has been identified and there will be due proceedings against him. And I believe that every single Russian soldier, every single Russian general and commander will have to be tried and will have to be brought to justice with their crimes identified, atrocity by atrocity, named and declared for the whole wide world to see. As for the prison in Olenivka, where that is the town where these prisoners of war were held, well, it's just a mystery, really, yeah, how the Ukrainian prisoners of war were all killed and the Russian prison guards remain alive and without so much as a wound or an injury to them. So I think that answers the question for the whole world: who is guilty and who is behind this attack on the prisoners of war detention center.
Can I ask you for just finally, how would you assess the morale of the country as a whole at the moment?
We are standing strong. And we understand that as a nation, as a country, we will have to stand strong and as long as it takes. We are prepared to do that. We knew this from the first hours on that morning on the 24th of February, that it will be a long game that we will have to play to win. But of course, having said that, you have to realize that we are tired also, the same as the whole world is tired. I mean, it's been 6 months of continuous fighting, air raids, of uncertainty. I think the uncertainty is what gets people the most. Psychologically, it's more than a challenge. It's an extremely difficult situation that many families find themselves in. But at the same time, every difficulty that Russia throws our way makes us more determined and more resilient to stand our ground.
Lesa, thank you very much indeed. Be strong. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Ukraine MP and Deputy People of Ukraine, Lesa Vasilenko. Now, it is a huge weekend for Birmingham, as we were hearing just now. And the city, of course, is hosting the first weekend of the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Our Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has been covering the event so far and has the latest. Will, it was an amazing day yesterday with gold all over the place for many of the home athletes. What's on the agenda today that we should be looking out for?
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's been a spectacular Commonwealth Games so far, the 22nd Commonwealth Games here in Birmingham on the year 2022. It's almost like they did it on purpose. It's fantastic to be here right in the middle of it. Where we are right now is just outside of Birmingham, New Street, right in the centre of Birmingham. You can see the gates behind us, which is keeping people penned out from where the marathon has been running past us every half an hour or so. The men's paras, the women's paras earlier this morning, as well as the men's just went past maybe about 45 minutes ago. We're expecting the women's to go past in the near future. They might be going past now, actually, but we can't see too much of that. But we've, as far as you can kind of see up there, that's where it leads right to Victoria Square in the very distance. So it's been a fantastic weekend so far. This is the second day. There's 69 medals up for grabs today, as well as the marathon happening. There's gymnastics. There's also swimming. So lots of things that have been happening. One of the things that also has been happening today up and down the country, as well as affecting here in Birmingham, is of course train strikes. Lots of people had been hoping to come to Birmingham via the trains, but they're finding that they're stranded at stations up and down the country because they simply can't get in, which is a real difficult thing. ASLEF train drivers, part of the ASLEF union, 5,000 of them are on strike because of a pay dispute. The rail delivery group that represents different train operators say that they've planned this strike to go on directly during the Commonwealth Games, something that's been planned for 4 years, something that has had hundreds of millions of pounds put into it. It's also on the day that the football season starts for many clubs, so it seems to be targeted. That's what the rail delivery group are saying. ASLEF Trains Union, they say, on the other hand, that they don't want to be on strike, that they're doing this because they simply have to because of a pay dispute. So obviously disagreements on either side of what's going on in the rail unions as well as the rail operators. So Commonwealth Games are saying that they would like people to use public transport, but there are obviously lots of ways to get around the city, even though it is very jammed.
Just tell me about the concession that some of the people coming apparently had on their travel. Didn't they have a concession to give them sort of cheaper travel to get to the Games? But as they can't get to the Games, I'm afraid that's just blown away with the wind, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course. Well, Birmingham 2020 said that they wanted to make this the most sustainable Games ever, so they were encouraging people to walk to their Games as well as get the bikes, cycle around the city. There's lots of areas that have been fenced off, so perfect for cycling. But one of the big things that they've done is that they've put the bus services on, so anybody who's got a ticket and they're inside of the West Midlands can get a ticket to wherever they can go, so they can get on a train, they can get on a bus, and they can get around a little bit more easily. But West Midlands trains, they've got no services on today. Of the 6 or 7 other train operators they're running that are also experiencing strikes, they're also seeing severely reduced services, so they're Birmingham Commonwealth 2022 are recommending try not to get on the trains if you can, figure out another way of getting into the Commonwealth Games.
Well, while you were talking, we can see every so often, I think there are some of the women, and in fact just about to come behind you now, some of the women in the women's marathon. That's what's going on at the moment, is it?
Yeah, that's what's going on right behind us. We can't see too much of it, but it seems to be what's drawing a lot of attention into the city today. There's also, as I said, gymnastics and swimming, so lots of things to watch when you do have the opportunity to.
Well, you enjoy whatever it is that's going on behind you, and thanks very much indeed for that, Will. That was our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who is at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Now, you've been getting in touch on one of our big topics of the day, the ongoing rail strike. Gilly has said the rail strike is about bringing the government down. The union heads are paid very high salaries. I think that they are all such hypocrites with the motto, don't do as I do, do as I say. Well, Linda says, I cannot believe how selfish ASLEF are being to the British people. Children are on their summer holidays and have had a torrid time with COVID. With the cost of living rising through the roof, the average family cannot afford holidays. So a few odd days out by the sea is their holiday. But the RMT union cannot allow families to a break. They are out to make families' lives as miserable as they possibly can for their own selfish means. Well, actually, we're going to be talking about how you might be able to enjoy some time with children during the school holidays in the next hour of the programme coming up. And hopefully it'll be things that aren't going to cost you anything at all. Now, the rail strike could go on for weeks. This is Eunice saying now, how can the strikers afford so much time off with no pay on the days that they strike? Don't they realise that they are asking for that, and what they are losing by striking could take several years to balance out? You got a point there, haven't you, Eunice? Absolutely. Well, do keep your views coming in, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. Now, the UK is facing a housing shortage and a construction boom at the same time, but with large amounts of building construction happening across the country, are we cautious enough about the environmental impact that these projects have? Well, our East of England reporter Ed Crawford has been in Longstanton, speaking to one business owner there who feels that the new development near him is having severe implications for his business.
Britain's on the build, but how does this impact the environment? North Stowe, close to Cambridge, is a new development neighbouring the village of Longstanton. By 2040, North Stowe will have around 10,000 homes with shops, leisure parks and even its own town centre. But at what cost does building new towns have on existing residents nearby? In Longstanton, residents are coming together and crowdfunding legal challenges over the newly approved Phase 3 construction of Northstowe. They claim the previous development phases are responsible for environmental changes to the surrounding environment. Clive Hayden is a concerned local businessman who runs a fruit and vegetable farm in Longstanton. Each morning, Clive checks his crops and prepares to ration out his water. Clive has grown up in Longstanton and his family have farmed the land for 6 decades. But when he checks his well, he wonders how long can he keep going.
I've lost quite a few feet of water since the development started. It's a bad state of affairs now, and could possibly get a lot worse, and that's the worry of all that's going on.
Clive has witnessed and documented the environmental impact of the Northstowe development since it began and feels the groundwater has been manipulated and reduced.
Well, by reducing the groundwater levels, it's restricted my ability to extract water from the gravel seam now, whereas I could abstract sufficient during the summer months to keep my greenhouses watered. And initially, at the early years ago, we used to do double crops, so we'd have the first one through, but then we used to be planting up with a second crop. There's just no chance of that, and just not the water available now. So the little bit of water I have got, I keep for just growing fruit and veg. So the main greenhouses stand empty, which have had the same crop of flowers through. So production-wise, they're down. It's halved. The worry now is with the impact we've already had and seen from the lowering of the water table. Any worsening of that in the long run, that would just basically finish me. There's just no future without the water from the well.
Has the development in Northstowe caused environmental damage to the surrounding area?
The impacts on the environment, some ponds in the village, they've dried up, no longer features at all. Trees are dying. Certainly on my property I've lost 30 odd trees, and I'm losing more on a yearly basis now. It's just having an impact on everything really. Long term, there's no telling what could happen.
When asked about water reduction in the area, Dr. Toomey Hawkins of South Cambridge Council said, during the Phase 1 works, the developers did remove water from the site as part of their initial construction works. At the time, the removal of the water did not require consent from the council or the Environmental Agency. The position has subsequently changed, and consent would now be needed from the Environmental Agency to protect groundwater resources. The land developers told GB News all necessary consents were obtained prior to work undertaken at Northstowe, and water removed was retained locally. As the need for housing increases around the country, the environmental impact of mass construction is yet to be seen. Ed Crawford, GB News.
And indeed, that was our reporter, Ed Crawford there. And we're going to be discussing the issue of housing rather more in the next hour, with a focus particularly on second homes. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. Also coming up on the show this afternoon, we'll be continuing our conversation on the rail strikes. And, of course, we can't get away from it, I'm afraid, the Tory leadership race. But first, let's take a look at what the weather's going to do.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy, with showery outbreaks of rain pushing eastwards across the country. Let's take a look at the details. Across northern Scotland this afternoon, there'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, though most places could stay dry. Highs reaching 21 Celsius, with winds falling light. Northern Islands will remain largely cloudy, with some light and patchy rain in places. In any brightest spells, temperatures will lift to 21 degrees Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for northern England with spells of rain. Some of the rain could be heavy, feeling cooler with highs of 21 degrees Celsius. Turning a little brighter for northern parts of Wales through this afternoon, though there is still the risk of a few passing showers. Breezy over the mountaintops, highs of 20 degrees Celsius. Often cloudy for the East Midlands with a few glimmers of sunshine possible. However, there could be a few showers too, which may occasionally be heavy. Feeling warm with highs of 25 Celsius. East Anglia will be mostly cloudy today, though largely dry. The odd shower is possible, and it will be a warm feeling afternoon with highs reaching around 25 degrees Celsius. It will be a mainly dry afternoon to come across southern parts of England, with spells of warm sunshine and generally light southwesterly winds, highs approaching the mid-20s of Celsius. Further showery rain will push eastwards across central and western parts this evening. Elsewhere should stay mainly dry, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. It is just coming up to 2 minutes past 1 o'clock. I'm Angela Rippon and I'm sitting in for Alistair this weekend. We are now into the last hour of this programme and I'm going to be keeping you company on TV and radio for that time. Plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion today, of course. Disruption on our transport services as train drivers walk out, overpay, and of course we're going to be discussing the Tory leadership race. Plus, how can we save money this summer? Well, all of that is to come, but first, let's get the latest news with Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. Lincolnshire police are appealing for help in tracking down a man over the fatal stabbing of 9-year-old Lilia Valetute in Boston. CCTV images have been released of someone they want to urgently question as part of their investigation. They're asking the public to help identify the man, adding if he's seen, he should not be approached and 999 should be called immediately. The force says 2 people who were arrested earlier this week have now been released with no further action. Rail services are being severely disrupted across the country following the latest round of industrial action. Thousands of drivers from 7 train companies have walked off the job as part of a series of strikes over pay and conditions. It's affecting football fans travelling to opening games of English leagues, as well as people trying to get to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. More strikes will be staged next month, which travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder, says will be even worse.
In 2 weeks' time, a much bigger strike, because that will bring in Avanti West Coast, which runs from London to the West Midlands, northwest England and into Scotland, and also Cross Country, which does lots of stuff, particularly centred on Birmingham. If, for example, you wanted to travel on the Great Western region, and that's a really significant one, as you can imagine this time of year, there are no trains serving Devon and Cornwall.
In a huge blow to Rishi Sunak, former Tory leadership contender Tom Tugendhat has endorsed Liz Truss in the race to become Prime Minister. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee says her promises of tax cuts are based on true Conservative principles and that only she can unite the party. He says both contenders have huge qualities and many talents, but Ms Truss has an advantage on the world stage because of her cabinet position. But Conservative MP Andrew Bowie told GB News Rishi Sunak would be a better leader, given the cost of living crisis.
when Chancellor created the furlough scheme that saved 11 million jobs in a matter of days, saved thousands of businesses from going bust with the bounce back scheme and other support measures to support them, introduced ETAC to help out that saved so many of our hospitality industries from going bust over the summer of 2020. So I think when you look at it in the round, Rishi has demonstrated by his actions as Chancellor that he's very, very willing and able to deliver short-term measures to support people who are struggling.
The lawyer for victims and families impacted by the infected blood scandal says they must be compensated immediately. It's after the inquiry chairman said more than 2,000 surviving victims should receive £100,000 each without delay. About 2,400 people died in what's been labelled the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS after patients were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 1980s. In a major shake-up of the youth prison system, the government is building the UK's first secure school for young offenders. It will house some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, aged between 12 to 18, including those who've committed murder. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab, who visited the site in Rochester in Kent, says the radical change in approach aims to break the cycle of crime.
That with this particularly tough to reach young group, it is the key to giving them an opportunity to turn their life around and fundamentally reducing the very high levels of reoffending from young offender institutes, and that will keep our streets safer.
Russia's Gazprom says it stopped supplying gas to Latvia, accusing the country of breaching the conditions of an agreement. It comes after the Ukrainian government accused Moscow of state-sponsored terrorism following the reported deaths of 50 prisoners of war. Russia has blamed Ukrainian missiles, which allegedly struck the detention centre of Hollenreich. Ukrainian MP Vasilenko told GBNews that Russian troops were likely covering up the murder of the POWs by blaming Ukrainian missiles.
As for the prison in Hollenreich, well, it's just a mystery, really, yeah, how the Ukrainian prisoners of war were all killed and the Russian prison guards remain alive and without so much as a wound or an injury to them. So I think that answers the question for the whole world: who is guilty and who is behind this attack on the prisoners of war detention center.
Boris and Carrie Johnson are hosting a wedding party at the Cotswolds estate of a major Tory donor. A huge white marquee has been erected on the grounds of Daylesford House. The event will commemorate the couple's wedding, which was held during COVID restrictions in Westminster Cathedral in May last year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Angela.
Thanks, Alice. Now, today we've been tackling two pretty meaty topics, the ongoing rail strikes and the race to get to number 10 Downing Street. A great mix of opinion by my guests and, indeed, from your emails and tweets, some of which I'm going to read a little bit later in the programme, so do keep them coming in, please. But there are a number of questions on both of those topics that do need to be answered. Could we see national strike action if Liz Truss becomes PM, off the back of the union comments today? Well, regular Brits are paying more and more to travel, so what can the incoming PM do to ease the burden on passengers, whoever it is that gets the top job? And what should our outgoing PM be doing in the meantime to stabilise our economy and our rail network? Well, joining me in the studio now is political commentator Andy Williams. I'm going to start, Andy, with the rail strike. Do you think Grant Shapps should get involved now, because they've really dug their heels in on both sides, and actually the unions aren't talking to their members anymore?
Well, absolutely. I mean, he's the Transport Secretary. And even though the Prime Minister is on his way out, this government still needs to be governing. And I think that what's really needed with this strike situation at the moment is dialogue. Dialogue between the government, between the unions, between the workers, to resolve it, because clearly train strikes are a pain for millions of people up and down the country. People can't travel today. But equally, workers do have and should have the right to strike and to have the opportunity to get better pay and conditions.
But they should also presumably have the right to comment on the offers that are being made to them. And it would seem at the moment that they're not having that. Is that right?
There seems to be a disconnect, really. And it feels like dialogue has broken down. I think Grant Shapps has said that it's not really his role to get involved, and that's something for the unions and the the workers to work out between them. But it strikes me that really he should be getting involved.
Yeah. OK, let's turn now to the leadership race. Are we? I mean, you've only got to look at the press today to see how many of them are committing column inches to stories about her compared to considerably less that they're giving to Rishi Sunak. Are we seeing a procession to number 10 with Liz Truss at the head of it and that Rishi Sunak hasn't got a chance anymore?
I think we are. I mean, with these contests, momentum is a massive thing. Yeah. She absolutely has the momentum. She seems to have won over a significant proportion of Tory members with her message around low tax, around sort of crushing the unions.
Yeah.
And I don't really see Rishi Sunak getting back into the race. I know that this weekend he's spending a lot of time meeting members across the south of England, trying to change their minds, really kind of pressing the flesh.
Yeah.
But it would have to be a remarkable comeback from here, I think.
Now, I mean, I read yesterday an interesting article which told me who the people in Liz Truss's press team are. They come from very, very high-powered press organisations and public relations companies. Are we seeing the possibility of a Prime Minister being voted in on the back of a very sophisticated press campaign rather than one who is actually going for economics and policies?
Well, yeah, I think what's interesting about this race is that both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have very, very carefully cultivated images.
Yeah.
Instagram, social media has been a huge part of both of their campaigns, and not just their campaigns, but during his time as Chancellor, during her time as Foreign Secretary, and before that as International Trade Secretary, going around the world, lots of photos going up of her looking very statesmanlike on planes, on the steps of planes, meeting world leaders. So image is a huge factor. I think for Liz Truss specifically, she, and it's been much commented upon, but she has sort of modelled herself a bit on Margaret Thatcher in terms of the way she dresses and projects herself. And I think she said the other day that I have a rod of steel running through me, which surely alludes to sort of Iron Lady type aspects. So no, image, massive thing, and certainly it's very carefully cultivated. But I do worry that there's not been a great deal of focus or scrutiny on what she's actually proposing, on her policies, particularly on the economy. She's talking about cutting taxes straight away. She says it's costed. I don't really see where that's coming from. She's talking about fiscal headroom. It seems to me that she's just making promises that perhaps she might not be able to keep.
Yeah, very interesting that there's a lot of very positive comments about her, but I have to tell you, Dominic Cummings, wouldn't you expect, said she is as close to crackers as anyone I have ever met in Parliament. We might talk about that a bit later on. I'd like to bring in one of my other guests now, please, because we've heard from a number of guests today during our discussion on rail strikes, and I'm joined now by Sarah Nelson, who is a spokesperson for Transport Focus, which is the independent watchdog for passengers. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me, the unions are not talking to the management anymore, the management not talking to the unions. Do you feel that actually you, as someone who represents passengers, feel that the passengers, who after all, you know, effectively provide the money in many cases that pay the wages of the people we're talking about, are being left out of these negotiations altogether? What, if anything, can you do to give passengers a bigger voice?
Yeah, passengers are really frustrated with the whole situation. They understand it's really complex and that, you know, there's lots of money gone into propping up the railway, but equally they've been asked to pay a lot. They just want things to be sorted out now and they want their voice to be heard.
But can you, as an organisation which supports passengers, actually do anything practical to give them that voice at this time?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're talking to thousands of passengers every week, as we do all the time, and we're using the information we get to feed back to try and make things better for them. So, OK, of course, as a passenger representative, we don't have any place at the negotiating table. But what we can do is say, are you providing good enough information about what actually is and isn't running and what you can do if you can't travel? Are you making it easy for people to claim refunds or replan your journey? Are you making sure there's people at the station to help the people, like the lady we spoke to today who pitched up trying to get to an 80th birthday party going from Swansea to Birmingham and told us she gets her information from station posters, so hadn't clocked it. We're checking in on people and making sure that things like that are picked up and that the train companies have an opportunity to make it better with those specific things and with those bigger overall things like quality of information, easiness of refunds.
What about advice for passengers that turn up? I know yesterday, for instance, I had a friend telling me that Paddington Station was a scene of complete and utter mayhem. You could not literally walk from one side to the other of the concourse because so many hundreds of, well, thousands probably of people were packed onto that station. Can you, I mean, on a practical level, give people any advice at all of how they can cope with situations like this when they find that their trains have been cancelled, they're delayed, that they're not going to be allowed to get on a train, that they can't actually buy a ticket anymore? I mean, what kind of advice can you give to people to help them stay sane during these situations?
It's the key piece of advice that we've been repeating is please check before you set off. You might think you've got everything under control, but just before you leave the house, quickly check, make sure everything's still running. If you get to the station and things appear to be not running, if there's, you know, lots of people looking confused, try and find a member of staff. We do know that there's lots of staff doing the absolute best they can. They will know the latest on what is and isn't running, and they'll be the experts in whatever area you're in, so they'll help you replan, because it might mean using a different method. You might be able to use a bus. They might say you're going to have to come back and travel tomorrow. They'll try and help you out. So yeah, check before you travel, speak to the staff, make sure your phone's fully charged so you can ring for help if you need to. And yeah, above all, please just be careful and be mindful of others, because some people are able to look after themselves well at a station. Some people have accessibility needs that aren't going to be met and they're really going to be struggling. So I hope everyone will look out for each other.
Once all of this is over, which hopefully it will be at some point, how do you feel the situation could be improved to ensure that passengers' feelings, passengers' needs are actually taken into consideration when you have these kind of negotiations?
So what we've been doing throughout this is gathering the impact that it's had on people, the things that maybe the industry wouldn't necessarily think of straight away, the sort of knock-on impacts of how people kind of find it when they're actually in the moment travelling. We're gathering all that together and we're actually feeding it back as a bigger piece to the people within the industry and saying, look, these are the things that you need to think about next time. It might not be industrial relations next time. There might be a sudden snowstorm or the heat we've had recently. So when people are disrupted, these are the kind of things that you need to think about. And so we've had some wins, like we've had information improved on websites. We've said to them, you know, it's great putting all this really detailed information on your website, but if you go on the homepage, there's no indication that there's anything wrong. Make there a big flashing arrow for the kind of people who aren't used to looking for this sort of stuff. So that's the kind of thing we'll be doing, looking at how it affects people and how they can make it better.
I think, Sarah, you're going to have your work cut out, but at least you're pre-planning. So hopefully when it is all over, things will get a lot better. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. That Transport Focus spokesperson, Sarah Nelson. Andy, just to come back to you, I mean, we've heard that earlier in the programme I was talking about the threat that Mick Lynch is making, that if mistrust does become the Prime Minister, he is going to call a general strike because he thinks that what she intends to do with strikers, what she intends to do with trade unions, will actually be infringing their democratic rights. How serious do you think that threat might be?
I think very serious. I mean, we can see it today. There was a strike earlier this week. I think it was on Wednesday. There are another two planned for August. So it's becoming relentless. I don't think they're going to back down until there's a resolution on pay. But what I do think, particularly with Liz Truss assuming that she is going to be the next Prime Minister, is that the way she can really resolve the situation is come up with a plan to tackle inflation, because that's what's driving these disputes, is that inflation is eroding people's pay. And people need fair pay, people need pay rises to make sure that they're able to live through this cost of living crisis.
And that's exactly the platform on which Rishi Sunak is performing, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think...
why aren't people listening to him?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are pretty aligned on this issue, actually. And I suppose I don't think people are really listening to him because nobody thinks he's got much of a chance of becoming Prime Minister anymore.
Oh, do you think that's what it is?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think realistically we need to be, I think we're 5 weeks or so out and we need to be preparing.
Well, they start voting on Monday, don't they? That's when the ballots... Now, because it's interesting that you've got people like Ben Wallace and you've got Tugendhat who've come out now in support of Truss. I mean, the cynics of the world are saying, well, of course they are, because they think she's going to be Prime Minister and they want a job in the Cabinet, which could be true. But where are the people of high power and influence now coming out in support of Rishi Sunak? Why aren't they being heard?
Well, I think you're completely right. Frankly, people are seeing which way the wind is blowing.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Tom Tugendhat, really, if you look at his politics and where he positioned himself in the race, you would absolutely have expected him to go into the Rishi Sunak camp. And I think probably he's made a calculation that, I quite fancy being Foreign Secretary, actually. I wouldn't mind being in Liz Truss's camp. So, look, that's politics, and I don't think you will see too many more senior people who haven't already declared for Rishi doing so.
No. It's very interesting. She's, I see she's now coming out saying, I have a 10-year plan. My goodness, we're going to have a general election in 2 years. She's being optimistic, isn't she?
She's a very confident person. Yes. I don't think anyone could ever accuse Liz Truss of lacking confidence, that's for sure.
Yeah. OK, Andy, thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks a lot. Well, joining me now is Councillor Sam Firth. He's Leeds City Councillor for the Harewood Ward and Elmet Villages, and he's also chair of East Leeds Conservative. Thank you very much for joining us, Councillor Firth. Let me ask you, first of all, we had the hustings, of course, in Leeds a couple of days ago. What did you want to hear from both of the candidates? And did you, in fact, hear what you wanted to hear?
Well, thank you, Angela, and please call me Sam. Don't call me councillor.
I will call you Sam.
The biggest, we're all normal people. The situation on Thursday was a really interesting event. I actually went with my eyes open and willing to listen to what the candidates had on offer. I think the pitch from Liz was certainly playing to a home crowd at Ellen Road in Leeds, which is welcome to us. But also Rishi did make sure that, being a Yorkshire MP, he was able to make us hear that he certainly had Yorkshire as one of his priorities as well. I think the biggest thing that for us we wanted to hear was about levelling up. There's been too much time in which papers and news outlets across the north, and across Yorkshire in particular, have been criticising the government wrongly for, effectively, in their opinion, forgetting about levelling up. We have two candidates that are absolutely committed to it, and they certainly made those claims clear on Thursday night.
What impressed you most about each of them?
Well, I think the biggest thing was actually that a lot of people have got low expectations when it comes to Liz in comparison to Rishi Sunak about their speaking abilities and ability to hold a crowd. And I think the one thing that really impressed me was that Liz had honed a pitch to those in Leeds. It was very interesting to see that she was pulling out all the greatest hits of all of her time when she lived here and grew up here. And Rishi as well was able to really make clear, especially when under pressure from Nick Ferrari asking a number of questions from LBC, to actually clearly line out what he was setting out to, as you mentioned in the last segment, to deal with inflation and to tackle the wider issues. So I think both of them really pulled the stops out, because it was the first event, and wasn't it fantastic that we hosted it right here, where we like direct questions and answers here in Yorkshire.
You say both of them concentrated, and Liz Truss perhaps rather more than Rishi Sunak, on what you wanted to hear in Leeds. But there's, I think, going to be another 11 hustings, aren't there, all over the country. Do you expect them then to concentrate on the area in which they are appealing to those particular voters? Or should they actually just, as Rishi Sunak tried to do, broaden out and talk more about what they want to do for the country as a whole? They are, after all, going to be Prime Minister of the country, not just of Leeds.
Well, I think the interesting format is that, like in 2019, when it was Boris versus Jeremy Hunt, there is a section where they get to make their pitch over a number of minutes and then actually answer some questions from an interviewer. And those questions were quite broad-ranging. When Liz had gone particularly on the Leeds focus, the questions from LBC certainly focused then on national issues, although making sure that she was assessed on some of her claims about Leeds. And Rishi was done the same. I think the biggest thing is that we need to know one thing, which is politicians are in Westminster a lot of the time, and we need to know that they're willing to listen to people across the country, and they need to be able to tailor their pitch at the same time to understand how they can offer a pitch to the whole country and not leave areas behind. And I think that's why it's absolutely critical that, you know, having the Conservatives in the first place move their HQ to Leeds last year, their second HQ, that actually the first hustings was at the heart of the Red Wall, although that was criticised when Liz Truss said it, and that ultimately we could hear directly from them what they wanted to do to continue and deliver the manifesto we were elected on only 3 years ago.
I love the word deliver, because so many people say that in whether it's a general election or a local election or an election as we have now for the next Prime Minister, that people make all sorts of promises when they are on the road, as it were, when once they get into office, they don't necessarily deliver. How convinced are you that whichever of these two wins, they will deliver all the things they're now promising?
Well, I think the one thing that's really interesting is actually that some of the claims that they made on Thursday and some of the promises that they made are things that the government in the past has said that they couldn't do. And, for example, the biggest one last week was the confirmation that both candidates want to deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail, which, to my residents here in Leeds, is effectively a high-speed link between Hull and Liverpool, but particularly between Leeds and Manchester across the Pennines. And to have that reignited as an idea was absolutely critical, because a number of us were concerned when the HS2 link to Leeds was cancelled last year, that actually, well, cancelled or put on hold, whichever you wish to say. The fact is that we were concerned because a number of my residents tell me every time I'm knocking on their door, OK, that's fine about HS2, but we still want to get between not only just here in Leeds, but the cities around us and connect up the north and build that northern powerhouse that's been promised for so long.
I'm going to ask you very briefly, very quickly, have you, as a result, made up your mind which way you're going to vote? And if you have, will you be prepared to tell me?
Well, I tell you something, this is the first leadership contest. I've only voted in 2 because we didn't get to vote in 2016. But this is the first one where I can't make my mind up yet. And I'm actually waiting because it seems to be that the policies are being announced regularly as certain things and topics come up. And so that's what I'm looking for. But I have to be honest, what's come out this week in terms of stuff there, it's certainly making me think. But I have to be honest, Angela, and I'm sure you want politicians, even us councillors, to be honest. I haven't made my mind up.
An honest politician. Sam, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme and being so honest. Thank you. And I hope you make your mind up soon, by Monday anyway. Councillor Sam Firth there from Leeds City Council for the Harewood Ward and Elnet Villages and chair of East Leeds Conservatives. Well, Andy Williams is still here with me. What do you make of what Sam was saying there? Do you think he's a reflection, because it isn't the country that's going to vote, it is only Conservative voters. Do you think he's a fine reflection of what's going on in their minds at the moment?
I think it's very interesting that he's not made his mind up. And that will be encouraging for Rishi Sunak, because he's going to need to persuade those waverers over the next week or two. I think it's interesting that we were talking about delivery there, and whoever comes in really is going to have to hit the ground running, because, as you said earlier, 2 years until a general election, actually not a huge amount of time to get things done. And if you look at the record of the Boris Johnson government, he'll often talk about Brexit, COVID. Clearly, there was lots of stuff that he needed to sort out there that emerged that could never have been anticipated. But the record of his government in terms of delivery, in my view, not great. So the next person is going to have to come in and deliver some real tangible achievements quickly, I think.
Hit the ground running and do what they promise. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks so much. Andy Williams, political commentator. OK, we've got plenty more coming this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, the never-ending row when it comes to property, second homes. Now, one of Britain's biggest building societies is restricting mortgage offers on second homes in an attempt to help more buyers get on the property ladder.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 1:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. Lincolnshire police have released CCTV images of a man they want to question over the fatal stabbing of 9-year-old Lilia Valetuta in Boston on Tuesday. They're urgently appealing for help to identify him, adding if he's seen, he should not be approached and 999 should be called immediately. Thousands of drivers from 7 train companies have walked off the job as part of a series of strikes over pay and conditions. The industrial action is causing severe travel disruption for football fans heading to the opening games of English leagues and people trying to get to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Former Tory leadership contender Tom Tugendhat has endorsed Liz Truss in the race to become Prime Minister. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee says her promises of tax cuts are based on true Conservative principles and that only she can unite the party. The lawyer for victims and families impacted by the infected blood scandal says they must be compensated immediately. It's after the inquiry chairman said more than 2,000 surviving victims should receive £100,000 each without delay. About 2,400 people died in what's been labelled the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS after the patients were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 1980s. The government is building the UK's first secure school for young offenders. The site in Kent will house some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, aged from 12 to 18, including those who committed murder. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says the radical change in approach aims to break the cycle of crime. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Angela will be back in just a moment.
And welcome back. Now, one of Britain's biggest building societies has announced that it's withdrawing from lending on second homes to focus on those who are trying to get on the property ladder. Leeds Building Society says it will keep lending on buy-to-let properties and holiday homes only if they have people occupying them for the majority of the time. What is this going to mean for first-time buyers? And indeed, will it stop homes lying empty? I'm delighted to be joined now by property expert Richard Blanco to explain the very latest. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Just tell me, how do you think this crackdown is going to actually help first-time buyers?
Good afternoon, Angela. Well, it's a very noble thing that Leeds Building Society are doing here. And I agree, I hate to see properties empty when, so many people need homes. But the reality is that this is one of many lenders. And as you say, they're still going to lend to people who are buying buy-to-let properties or who are going to let properties. So it's going to be a very small proportion, really, of properties that won't end up getting mortgages, and they'll be able to go elsewhere. Really, the big issue, Angela, is that we need to build more homes. The government set a target for 300,000 per annum in England, and I'm concerned that we're not going to meet that target. And in fact, there are 600,000 empty homes across the whole of England anyway. They're not second homes, they're just homes just kind of lying there that need refurbishing or being brought back into use. And we need to put some energy into bringing those back into use, I think.
There are an awful lot of second homes that do stay empty. I mean, I know in Cornwall, for instance, there's an organisation started which is called Cornwall Homes, trying to ensure that, in fact, the young people who live there, or anybody that lives there, can actually have a home of their own, which they're finding very, very difficult at the moment because so many people do have second homes, holiday homes, and they're only available to those people who are prepared to pay very high rents during the season.
Well, it's tricky, Angela, you see, because the tourism industry needs these short-term lets in order for the tourists that kind of pile in the summer to be able to stay in the area, spend money in the area, and of course create jobs locally. And without those local jobs, then local people wouldn't have the money to be able to rent or buy homes. So, you know, we need to try and get the right balance. The government in England is actually conducting a review at the moment, looking at all of these issues and looking at the way forward. I think it's likely we're going to see more regulations. Certainly Scotland is bringing in regulation for holiday lets. Wales is thinking of doing that, and we may well see that in England in future as well.
How does the market in second homes actually affect the housing market in general, bearing in mind that there are many of them left sort of unlived in for half the year?
Well, a lot of people argue that it pushes local prices up because, of course, people will come from London and the southeast and, you know, can afford higher prices than local people can, perhaps in Cumbria, Cornwall or Yorkshire. So some people argue it does affect property prices. But, you know, it's not always true that local people would want to buy those houses that second home owners are buying. I think we actually need a lot more council homes as well. We actually lost 3 million rented council homes during the Thatcher era and didn't replace them. So if we actually built more council homes, they would probably be more affordable for local people and perhaps help solve the problem.
But do you know of any council that's proposing to do that? I was brought up in a council house. I mean, I know all about how well they worked for my family and for millions of others. But I don't hear of councils building council houses anymore.
No, I grew up in a council house as well, actually, Angela, yes, in Nottinghamshire. And you're right, there are a few councils building them and some housing associations. We need a lot more investment in that area. And the government says it wants to, but we're just not seeing that kind of being delivered and those homes materialising. And I think that's the answer to this problem: affordable rented properties for key workers who live in those areas where they're struggling to afford homes. And, you know, let's not forget that second homes is a bit of a vague concept, actually. The vast majority of additional properties owned by people are either let for short-term accommodation or let for long-term accommodation. There aren't many people who have a second home that just kind of sits there empty for most of the year.
But it is a thorny problem, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Richard, for joining us. That was property expert Richard Blanco. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon, for just this weekend. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the cost of living crisis is actually only getting worse. So today, our summer savings segment is going to be dealing with how we can help you save extra pennies and pounds while the children are at home from school. And that'll be coming up right after this break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 20 minutes to 2. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Angela Rippon. Now, the race for the keys to Downing Street really is hotting up, with the final 2 candidates taking part in televised debates and hustings this week to stake their claim to the top job. Both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have strong support, but very different approaches on tax and how to take the economy forward. Sunak wants to cut VAT to ease the cost of living, whereas Truss has vowed to unlock home ownership. But who would be the safer pair of hands? Well, I'm joined now by Kevin Hollenreich. He's the Conservative MP for Thirsk and Malton. He is backing Rishi Sunak. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me. I don't think that you or Rishi would be very happy with a lot of the headlines in the press today. In The Guardian, desperate Sunak seeks to revive his leadership chances. In The Sun, is Rishi sunk? In The Telegraph, tax slip-ups plus all too casual approach equal trouble for the ex-Chancellor's leadership hopes. What has he got to do to get back on track?
Well, those are just headlines, Angela. What really counts are members' votes, of course, and and those ballot papers will be landing on people's doorsteps next week. I've got to say, in the polling we've done, and I recently took part in a members' virtual debate between myself and Graham Stewart, who supports Liz Truss, and the membership on that call was 50-50, 44% to Rishi, 44% to Liz, 12% undecided. So this is all to play for. So the polls where I am certainly don't reflect the polls I'm seeing in the newspapers. And most people I speak to in my patch who know Rishi really well, many of them do believe he's the right person to take this country forward.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of comment on both sides for and against both candidates. I want to read you something that was written by Mark Baker in the I newspaper. He says Rishi Sunak is fighting for the top job against a fiscally incontinent, not incompetent, but incontinent Liz Truss, who pompously sprays promises around like slurry from a muck spreader in the hope that it might fertilise some votes. That is a pretty savage indictment of her. How come Rishi Sunak can't counter that while Liz Truss, against that kind of comment, is still, I think, in one of the polls I've just seen, on 60% of the Conservative voters who are going to vote for her?
Well, that's pretty interesting way to put it all. But I mean, there's no doubt Liz Truss is spending an awful lot of money. We've already got a deficit on day-to-day spending of about £44 billion a year. And Liz's promises on tax cuts and green levies and the like amount to another £55 billion a year. That's £100 billion a year deficit. You've got to, if you're going to cut taxes, you've got to fund those tax reductions. And So I do think you've got to take a responsible approach. We haven't got a magic money tree. Liz or anybody else hasn't got one. Yes, as a party, we want to cut taxes, but we've got to fund those tax reductions and do them at the right time. What Rishi has said he will do, he'll cut business taxes this year, taxes on investment, which is important to get growth going, and then he'll cut personal taxes next year when the finances have improved and inflation's under control. The thing about Rishi is you've got to cast your mind back to where we were in the middle of the pandemic, where we were. People were saying unemployment's going to go to 10%. What Rishi did, he looked after everybody, and there was that unemployment didn't happen. Businesses stayed in business, and unemployment stuck at around 5%, a very marginal increase. He knows how to get things done. He's got good ideas. He knows how to implement. He's the right person and a safe pair of hands, and I think he takes a responsible approach to tax and spend.
It has to be said that it's at times been quite a toxic campaign, one way and another. And I have seen that there's an argument that, in fact, the Conservative, whichever one wins, the Conservative Party is going to be split down the middle on this. Now, Tugendhat is saying that Liz Truss is the one who can unite the party. But whichever one actually does become Prime Minister, what do you think is going to happen to the party? Is it going to be governable? Is it going to be a united party, bearing in mind the comments that have been tossed around by and on behalf of both candidates?
Well, I think it's really important we have a robust debate. It's also important that that debate doesn't get personal and it talks about the issues, not about people's character and the like. So I think largely the two candidates have done that. It's one or two commentators from the side who have been a little bit more direct, you might say. But we've been through these contests before. Of course they are robust, but the party comes together afterwards. It absolutely needs to. You're quite right. But it should be may the best person win. Whoever wins, the whole party, both membership and members of parliament, need to get right behind that Prime Minister and take us forward. You know, we've got so many things on our plate right now, the backlog in the NHS, the cost of living difficulties, war in Ukraine, all those things. It needs somebody who can hit the ground running and that we all support. I believe Rishi is the best person to do that. But as I say, let the best person win.
Thank you very much indeed. And as you say, it will be the best person, hopefully, that does win. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Kevin Hollenreich, who's Conservative MP for Thurston Malton, backing, as you can tell, Rishi Sunak for the next Tory party leader. Now, the cost of living crisis is here for the long haul, I'm afraid, and it's in front of everyone's mind at the moment, as people do struggle to afford basics like fuel and food. Now, this weekend marks the first of the summer holidays when children are out of school. And, of course, that can be very worrying for parents. How can we keep them entertained while also living on a budget and within our means? Now, that's what we're going to be discussing today in our Super Savings segment. So joining me now with his expert advice is Greg Marsh, who's consumer expert and founder of the company Noose, which supports households during the cost of living crisis. Just tell me why you think it is so important right at the moment that we should be thinking about ways of saving money, particularly during the summer holidays. What's on your list?
Thanks, Angela, for having me on today. Look, there's a couple of things going on, right? So let's get the really bad news out of the way first. It won't be news for everybody, but we all know energy prices have gone up a lot, and they're going to go up a lot more in the autumn. Current estimates are that an average household will be paying about £3,500 on an annualised basis for their electricity and gas come October, and that's going to get even worse in the winter, rising perhaps to as high as £4,000. That's a really miserable winter for everybody, and particularly the hard, cold months like January, where the current estimates are that a typical household may face a fuel bill, of electricity and energy bill just for January of £500, which again, put us in the context of a typical UK salary earner. That means that a quarter of your entire take-home pay will be spent just on heating and lighting your home. Now, that's brutal.
What the problems are going to be. Tell us, what do you think the solutions are going to be? Sorry, I said you've outlined very well what all the problems are going to be, particularly with fuel. But what are the solutions, particularly now we're coming into the summer holidays? Children at home, more food, children needing to be entertained, wanting to go on holiday. All of those are things that are going to cost extra money. What sort of advice can you give to families just to get them over this first period, and then we'll come to the winter after that?
Exactly. Well, the reason I was starting with the winter was because I think the biggest single tip we can share with anyone is, possibly for the first time, if you've done it regularly, then now's the time to do it again, budget. And this is not glamorous and it's not fun, but it's so important. Spending was very fashionable while it lasted. Saving is the new spending. We've all got to make plans. So put together a budget, figure out what you're spending money on, what you have to spend money on, and don't just do that for the next month. Do that for the next 12 months. Use the free tools online to help you do that, like Now.co and others. Now, much more practical stuff. As you say, we've got kids at home. Mine are now at home, running around downstairs while I'm here talking to you. So what you want to do is keep them entertained. And the challenge is how to do that cheaply. So one thing is days out. Now, days out can be incredibly expensive for a family. The challenge is how to do that cheaper, how to make sure you're making the most of the local attractions near to your house.
That are free.
The kids to the library this morning.
The ones that are free.
I beg your pardon?
The ones that are free.
The library. Yeah, we took the kids to the library this morning, which is a fantastic resource. It was almost empty. Lots of activities at the weekend at our local library. Museums, most museums are free. Day trips that are close to home. Also, make sure you're saving on the fuel bill for the round trip in your car. When you are on a day trip, right, the way that we might have done this last year is, have a fun lunch in a cafe or a restaurant. That's really expensive. So let's look at how we can save the pennies, to let the pounds take care of themselves, and let's make the most of the nice weather we're having by eating out. And I mean outside rather than in restaurants and cafes. Take a picnic with you, pack it the night before. It's fun for the kids, it's fun for everyone, and also it saves you money. So these little things are obvious tips. It's not like I'm telling anyone anything we don't know, but they add up. And if we make those little savings over the summer months, we'll have that extra money in the bank when we need it in the hard winter months to come.
Greg, can I just ask you this, and please don't take offence at this, but I know you're not short of a bob or two yourself. So what do you know about really how to live on a minimum wage?
Look, it's really tough. And what we're seeing right now for the users of our service is we're seeing people getting in touch with us, telling us that they are literally having to make impossible decisions about spending money on food or heating their homes. We've had people get in touch with us telling us that they are suicidal because of how hard this is. So I can't emphasize enough how difficult this is for households, and particularly the most vulnerable households. But I also want to emphasize that it's going to get tough for middle income households as well. Even people who have previously taken for granted that they have enough money to live on are going to have to make really tough decisions. And those tough decisions start today, right? If you're thinking about summer holiday plans, rather than taking longer overnight trips, take day trips, save the money on the Airbnb or the hotel bills. If you're thinking about Christmas plans, how can you make sure your Christmas this year is an affordable Christmas so that you've got pounds in the bank? So
you've got lots of ideas, and they're presumably all on your website as well. So, Greg, thank you ever so much for that, and for lots of tips. And I hope people will take your advice, because seriously, we are going to have a rotten winter ahead of us. So thank you very much indeed. Greg Marsh there, who's consumer expert and founder of the company Noose. Now, many of us work with the goal of one day being able to retire, but new data suggests that the cost of living crisis is leading some older people to return to the workforce. According to Rest Less, which is an organisation that looks after the over 50s, well, they are coming out of retirements at levels even higher than since the pandemic. So to discuss this further, I'm joined now by Stuart Lewis, who's Chief Executive of Rest Less. Stuart, I know, I think the figure that has been quoted is that there are more than 10 million people over 50 who are now out to work. Now, an awful lot of people, of course, when they retire, they've still got lots of energy, they've got lots of ideas, they've got lots of enthusiasm, and they want to go on working, and they do that. What percentage of that 10 million are doing it because they have to for real financial hardship?
We don't know the exact percentage of people who are still working are doing it for financial hardship. I think when we did a survey of restless members recently of people who were retired and who were considering going back to the workplace, 48% of them said it was for a real range of reasons, whether it's for the social and well-being aspects of it, or whether it's due to the cost of living crisis, or even to top up pension savings while they still can. I think on that, to your point around the social well-being aspect, if you think that COVID has been a really isolating time for so many of us, we often forget how much of our social life and our network revolves around the workplace. So it's not a surprise to see many more people consider going back to the workplace for those social and well-being aspects, actually.
An awful lot of the people that we're talking about that you deal with certainly are going back because they desperately need the money. They just cannot afford to live on the state pension and whatever perhaps small pension they may have from the job that they did.
Absolutely right. So for those reliant on the state pension, and we know that that is a significant proportion of people, we already have one of the least generous state pension provisions of other developed countries. But then when you think about back in April, the one-off removal of the triple lock meant that the state pension went up 3.1% in April when inflation was running at 9%. Now, the real challenge for people on the state pension is often they've been out of the workforce for some years. It can be quite hard to find other ways to top up your income. And I think what we've heard is many people are feeling a little bit more uncertain that the triple lock guarantee will be here to stay and that it may be at the whims of political positioning going forward. I think when you think about private pension savings, again, this generation of people in their 50s and 60s, we think are going to be one of the least well served from a private pension savings perspective. If you think to their parents' generation in their 70s, 80s, they would have typically had final salary pensions, long gone of that for people in their 50s and 60s today. And yet the flagship auto-enrollment scheme, which is encouraging and pretty much forcing most employers to contribute to pensions, which is a brilliant policy. It will work really well for those in their 20s because they'll have 4 decades of contributions to build up. For someone who's in their 50s and 60s today, they won't have had the same time for that compounding to work. And therefore, we think this could be one of the poorest cohorts from a pension savings provision.
Do you think that young people recognise the in their 20s and their 30s even, recognise the importance of actually having a pension so that they've got that safety net for when they reach 50, 60 and 70?
I still think across the UK we've got a real issue with people's engagement with pensions, actually. I don't think anyone really thinks as overtly as they should.
Oh, what a shame. We've lost him. That is such a pity, but it is true. We're getting towards the end of the programme anyway, I'm afraid. But anyway, thank you very much. I'm so sorry that we lost our guest there because I know he had a lot to say. That was Stuart Lewis, who's Chief Executive of Restless. It is all time we've got time for today. I shall be back tomorrow with another 2 hours, and I hope that you will make a point of joining me. I shall look forward to sharing the afternoon with you. Thank you for your company today. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy, with showery outbreaks of rain pushing eastwards across the country. Let's take a look at the details. Across northern Scotland this afternoon, there'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, though most places could stay dry. Highs reaching 21 Celsius, with winds falling light. Northern Ireland will remain largely cloudy, with some light and patchy rain in places. In any brighter spells, temperatures will lift to 21 degrees Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for northern England with spells of rain. Some of the rain could be heavy, feeling cooler with highs of 21 degrees Celsius. Turning a little brighter for northern parts of Wales through this afternoon, though there is still the risk of a few passing showers. Breezy over the mountaintops, highs of 20 degrees Celsius. Often cloudy for the East Midlands with a few glimmers of sunshine possible. However, there could be a few showers too, which may occasionally be heavy. Feeling warm with highs of 25 Celsius. East Anglia will be mostly cloudy today, though largely dry. The odd shower is possible, and it will be a warm feeling afternoon with highs reaching around 25 degrees Celsius. It will be a mainly dry afternoon to come across southern parts of England, with spells of warm sunshine and generally light southwesterly winds, highs approaching the mid-20s of Celsius. Further showery rain will push eastwards across central and western parts this evening. Elsewhere should stay mainly dry, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m.